The Lord be with you.
And
also
also
with
with
you.
you.
Holy God, as your word is open to us, let our hearts and minds be open to the word. May we hear your promise, but also be challenged to live it. And we ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, who is Word made flesh and lives among us. Amen.
Amen.
We are on the last of our Genesis Bible study. We are just going to get introduced to Abram and Sarai. God has not changed their name yet. So we're going to be starting just about on chapter 11, verse 31, very end of chapter 11. And we'll probably do 12 and 13 today. I'm not going to try to get into Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot and other stuff like that. So that's a whole nother study. Next week, we will start the book of Revelation.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was this week.
Well,
I did too.
well, I may have said it, but I lied. I've told other people this. It is so confusing to me because I'm now trying to plan Sundays in Lent and Holy Week at the same time. And so some weeks I have to look and say, what day am I preaching? So we will we'll start with maybe a little bit of background, maybe a mini quiz, and people can raise their hand with answers. Who are the sons of Noah, and who's the bad one, and who's the good one?
Oh.
You can cheat and look at the book too. It's right in front of you.
I have
This is
chemo.
an open book test.
I have chemo brain.
So do people see the if you look back at chapter, actually, if you look back at chapter
10, verse 1. Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Terry.
Chapter 10, verse 1 has the sons, I think.
Yeah, that's very good.
Is it Shem? What is it?
Shem
Shem,
Yeah,
Japheth,
Shem. Yeah.
and Japheth.
and so the one who's the one who gives birth to another person named Canaan?
Is that
Ham.
Shem's family line?
Ham is the one who gets his family gets cursed because they saw Noah's nakedness and kind of make fun of it. Is the tradition. And then, but the good guy is Shem. So all of the people that are might have roots to Haprui or Hebrews are the good guys. And the bad guys build cities, and the good guys are shepherds most often. So when we're reading the end of chapter 11, verse 31, we are in the middle of the children of Shem, S-H-E-M. And what is important here is, and I'll just read this portion. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah was 205, and Terah died in Haran. A couple of things about this that is important. There is a long-standing tradition that Haran is the place from which this, and you need to think of this more as a clan at this point, not a tribe, but a clan of people who are moving together. And so as they are moving, they move from Ur of the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans is another name for, anybody want to guess? Babylonians. So Ur of the Chaldeans is more down the Tigris Euphrates, where pretty much modern day Iran would be, and parts of Iraq. They travel north in what is called the Fertile Crescent, if you remember your Western Civ. The Fertile Crescent starts in the south of the Persian Gulf, goes up the rivers to the mountains, and then down, kind of down the mountain path, not the coastal path or road. So they settle at the top of that, which is a mountainous region, great for sheep. Not a lot of big cities up there. So they settle there for a while. And so we have Abram and Sarai, and we have Lot, we have his dad Haran, and then we have, if someone would begin by reading chapter 12, verses 1 through 9.
I'll read it.
Okay.
The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. How far did you say to go?
Go all the way down through 9, including 9.
Okay, so Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moher at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev.
Okay, in those first couple verses, why Abram? What reason did he pick Abram over all the descendants of Shem? Any guesses? It's a trick question.
Was he more trustworthy?
We don't know that.
No reason.
The trick question is, we have no idea. There is no reason why, there's no reason given why Abram is selected over anybody else. You know, in Noah's case, Noah was righteous before the Lord. In Abraham's case, we have nothing. It just is, I'm calling you out of the blue, go. So what is important here is that sometimes God calls people without a specific reason that is in the text. There may have been a reason, but it's not in the text. And it's an important part of the text to say that God can call anybody, and that call can happen. If you read Judges, Judges is a perfect example of God calling some of the most bizarre biblical characters in the whole book. He has thieves, and he has crooks, and he has scaredy cats, and he has all sorts of people that he calls to lead, to do God's bidding. And so in Abram's case, There isn't any explanation. It just says go. And when after that moment, what makes Abram, because Abram and Abraham later on are constantly referred to as being faithful. Why is Abraham faithful to God's command? What does Abram do when God calls?
He goes.
He goes. That's it. That's the answer. When God calls, go. Jonah. When God calls, what does Jonah do?
Runs
He
away.
did
Runs
it.
away. And what does God do? He puts him where he's going to need him. So this call is a call and response is a very important biblical concept. And Jesus picks that up. And John in his gospel makes it one of his most significant emphasis, which is come and see. So it go is part of that. Go from this place, but come and see where I'm going to be. This is in Scripture. This is faithful people do what God commands, and that is an important understanding. It's not a set of rules. It's when God calls, say yes. So what else happens? So he says, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land that I will show you.
Mhm.
And what comes next?
The blessings.
And it's a series of blessings. And this is an important part with Abraham. Blessings and covenant, so that when God makes a covenant, he says, go. And if you go, then I will bless you. So this is a two-sided covenant at this time. So there's a response, and then God says, if you do what I command, then I will bless you. But then what is the last part of the blessing?
They'll be blessed through him.
Yeah. Nations, people, other people will be blessed through him, even the ones that are not called by God. But if they curse him, they are cursed. But if they bless him, then he becomes that blessing to others. This is covenant at its best. God says a command, you do what God commands, you will be protected, and you who are blessed now become a blessing. Not just to his tribe, but to others as well. So an example of this later on that we're not going to see is the whole blessing of the priest king Melchizedek, who takes care of Abram and crew, and he receives the blessing. There's this, so you will see this pattern all the way through the Abraham story and this Abraham and Sarah story, is that the blessed, if people bless you, they will be blessed through you. This is Yahweh calling. Is this covenant piece make sense for people? Yeah, Terry.
Yeah, I was off video because I was having a snack, so I didn't want to eat in front of everybody. But as you were talking, I was listening, and it seems to me this raises a question about faith too, because it doesn't say that I'm aware of that Abraham had a relationship with God before this.
Nope.
So he's kind of stepping out into the unknown, and God's taking a risk on Abraham because Abraham doesn't have any credentials, as you pointed out. So it kind of points to this idea of, what is faith? It's sort of going out not knowing,
Right.
which I think is where resurrection is and where a lot of our churches are. So like, okay, what is faith? We don't know, we don't know who to trust, and yet we've got to step forward somehow. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, and Terry, one of the things you hit on is Luther's understanding of faith oftentimes is way more about trust than it is about beliefs. Does that make sense for people? It's not a creed. Faith isn't a creed. Oh, I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth. That's not what their understanding of faith is. Faith is trusting God's command and God's promise. And Luther would, in his writings, would constantly refer back to faith within that trust covenant relationship. So, Terry, I just want to share with you that you're very Lutheran. Which I guess is a good thing, Terry.
Well, good to know. I appreciate the affirmation, among other things that I am. So,
look at verse 4 and 5. Just look at those. What do you find interesting in those?
He took his family and all his possessions.
Yep.
He just packed up everything and left.
Right. What else is interesting?
Why did he take Lot? Why was Lot?
Well, sometimes nephews would hang on when somebody who has more status. If somebody has more status, then they might say, hey, this guy seems to be doing well, so I'm going to attach my star to theirs. It's a very clan. Remember, like I said, this is a clan-based kind of understanding of why a number of relatives might travel together. But how old was Terah, Terah, when he died? 205 years. So being 75, remember back in chapter 6, they're only going to live to 120, or at least one version. Abraham's, in this case, in his family history, he's kind of, a 40-year-old, in terms of the longevity of the family. So one of the things to do is we look at 75, and I don't know about the people on the screen. Laura, I'm glad you're here to balance us off. We may bring the age down 3 years or something. But what I want us to understand is this is also an important note, that this is from our standpoint an older person, and from their standpoint, when longevity was 40 to 45 years, this must be someone who is close to God image. Remember, that's the reason why people live so long in the ancient times, has to do with their literal connection to that original image and likeness of God from Genesis chapter 1. But he's 75, and he gathers up possessions. He goes into the land of Canaan. And do you think everybody in Canaan is just going to move aside and say, oh, Abram and Sarai are here, therefore we'll just leave the land and go someplace else? Is that what they do? No, they're going to fight with them for the next 2,000 years with the neighbors. So they're going to get the land, but it only takes about 4,000 years to get that.
Wow.
So at least 1,000 to time of David, and then after that, when the Jews retake Palestine. So this is an important piece. And again, we have covenant language. So when he comes into town, he is in what would be the middle section of Palestine, kind of the top of the Dead Sea, maybe even a little less than that. And it's around Shechem and Bethel. You'll hear both Shechem and Bethel become temple sites for the northern kingdom. It's also where most of this story happens, is in that area, which in Jesus's day would be called what? between Sea of Galilee and the southern kingdom?
Samaria.
Samaria. Why do you think the Jews hated Samaritans? Because they were living in their patriarchal lands.
Yeah.
That's part of it. So we by the time we hear, so he's done exactly what God told him to do up to verse 6, and then God makes a covenant again with him. Then the Lord appeared to Abram. What does that imply?
Maybe it was the first time he'd actually appeared to him.
Certainly could be. We don't have an image before that he appears to him. God appears to people who have been faithful. Sometimes in burning bushes, sometimes in shadows, sometimes in whispers. But the reality is when God shows up, this is a significant event. And when God shows up, he says, to your offspring. This is a very important word. To your offspring, I will give this land. So Abram builds an altar there to the Lord, and who had appeared to him. And then he moved onto the hill country on the east of Bethel. So Bethel's kind of in the valley, of the track that Shechem is in the valley. Bethel is in the hill country between Shechem and the Jordan River. Why would Abram go to hill countries? What's his job that we'll find out later?
Sheep.
Shepherding.
So it's an interesting thing if you ever study the first chapter of Joshua and Judges. It tells them and says, Israel, the Hebrews got all of this land except all the cities and all the roads. And for city people, they'd say, this is the stupidest gift in the world. But for shepherds, this would be an extraordinary gift. We get all the hills so we can feed our family and take care of our families. We don't need cities. We don't need roads. But it is, if you actually map out what they didn't get in both in Judges and Joshua, it's an interesting study of geography of just finding out what they didn't have. But what they needed, they got. And so suddenly we have God taking the next step in covenant. He builds an altar. He builds a second altar. And then Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev. Negev is a wilderness area south of Jerusalem in the area of what is current modern day Hebron, which would be right next to the Gaza Strip. So if you remember the Palestinian uprisings and other kinds of stuff, Gaza and Hebron, Hebron is in the interior, Gaza is on the coast, and it's not that far away. Because when I was in Hebron with the bishops, we could hear, and there was a war going on, we could hear the mortar fire in Hebron of what was happening just over the hill in Gaza. So it's very close. It's very close range. So in the Negev has three kinds of wilderness. They have hill wilderness, which has grasslands. It has some lower sections, which include part of the Dead Sea. And then they have, south of that, they have some very, very serious desert. So it's a mix of geographies that he's moving into. But he's moving by stages. If someone would pick up and read verses, let's just read 10 through 20.
I'll read. Okay. Now there was a famine in the land, and so Abram went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, and they will say, this is his wife, then they will kill me, but they will let you live. So you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared on your account. I always found that interesting. That was part of the culture, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. When the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, female donkeys, and camels, down to what, 20?
Yeah.
But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai and Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is it you have done to me? Why do you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? And then, here is your wife, take her and be gone. And Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and they sent him on his way with his wife and all that he had. Interesting.
So what did Abram do?
He said his wife was his sister.
Right, but what did that imply?
He was no
Implied
threat.
that it was. Mhm.
He was what?
Yeah.
No threat.
Yeah, no threat, but what did he do to Sarai?
He sort of,
Used her.
yeah.
Used
I was
would
gonna
be-
say sold her
used
out.
would be a way too polite word for what he did. He basically took his wife and gave him to another man to be a concubine and one of Pharaoh's many wives for sexual behavior.
To
It's
save his
very-
own life.
But who gets cursed?
The Pharaoh.
Pharaoh gets cursed,
Mhm.
not Abraham for literally pawning off his wife as his sister, and that she would become a concubine or a future one of the many wives of Pharaoh in that period of time. What is important here is sexual ethics in Genesis are very disturbing.
Mhm.
And so there's some people who says, yes, we need to have a biblical sexual ethic. My answer would be no, don't go there, because there's going to be more. It gets worse as the book goes on.
Oh, with Jacob and with Rachel and
yeah, Rachel,
Leah. I mean, it's
Leah,
like,
Milpah and Zophah. I mean, all sorts of
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
Where I used to give a quiz about the morality in the Genesis, and people didn't like the results. I said it's all in the Bible.
mhm.
And Abram does it twice.
Oh yeah,
Like,
Yeah, he does.
yeah.
yeah. This
Poor
is
Sarai, I'd say goodbye.
right. Yeah. So don't assume that biblical sexual ethics are the same as we would define sexual ethics. And I think that's an important consideration when we look at concubines, multiple wives, using women to establish position. And that's what he gets. Pharaoh realizes that somebody is on Abraham's side, though it's never talked about. Abram doesn't proclaim Yahweh to Pharaoh. He just says, you got power on your side. I'm going to give you this stuff. Why don't you go away? It's a bribe. That's why he gets all these things. Take what you have. We don't need you here. this is an important part of this piece, is that Abram has done what Yahweh has commanded, which was go. And Pharaoh pays a price for sleeping with another man's wife, even though the man manipulated the situation. And therefore he gets cursed when Abram ends up being further blessed with stuff. Laura.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think I'm usually a little bit preoccupied with what comes before and after and the whole pimping out Sarai thing. But the idea that we hold Abram up as this exemplar of trusting and responding in faith, and that is true. And yet here he's afraid he's going to get killed, but he's been promised descendants that he doesn't have yet. So that's a pretty substantial and not so great for Sarai lack of faith or trust that that's going to happen. So yeah. It's certainly a multi-dimensional character, which is in some twisted way kind of encouraging, really. But yeah, he's not willing to go the whole way.
Well, and the other side of that is the blessing hasn't happened yet. You know, and they were supposed to have the land, and the land's dangerous. So they go down to Egypt when there's a famine, come out of Egypt with a whole lot of new stuff. So that he becomes a clan leader at this point, with slaves, with goods, with transportation capacity. He is a wealthy man after Egypt, and we don't hear about all that wealth until we get to this part of the story. So as you hear this about Abram, what gets stirred up for you?
Makes me think about Old Testament versus New Testament in terms of morality, and how in the Middle East there's still incidents of Old Testament beliefs, or how women are treated.
Right.
That it's still going on like it did in biblical days.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just if you look at some of the Orthodox Jewish laws in Palestine, even to this day, what the role of a woman is within that culture and society, and what she can and can't do, still is very, very, very strict. So a man can divorce. A woman in Orthodox Judaism, a woman still cannot divorce their husband, even in situations of abuse. That's still part of the law, and it's not just there, but we have to understand that some of these ancient traditions continue to repeat themselves.
Well, beautiful women always seem to stir things up. You know, like, you know, that covetousness for the beautiful woman gets a lot of people into trouble.
And the problem with the Old Testament, it's usually the woman who gets in trouble, not the guy.
And they always describe the woman as being beautiful and shapely, and that's the one they go after.
Yeah. Right.
Jacob's case. Yeah. It's just
I mean, an example of that, even in the New Testament, is the story in John's Gospel, which may be a late addition to John, if you've ever read the woman who was caught in adultery. What about the guy who was caught in adultery?
Don't mention him.
Not at all. It's the
like
woman's fault.
It's his right.
It's the woman's fault.
Property.
And another place where this is happening in the United States till to this day is purity cults in Christian churches.
Really?
Wow.
Purity pledges. And because men are weak-willed, and therefore, if anything happens, it is always the woman's fault. So young girls take the purity pledge. Young men do not. That is still happening to this day. There's a recent book that has come out about the dangers of purity cults within evangelical Christianity.
Wow.
So what I'm saying is that we may project back and say, oh, this was awful. Don't worry, we got enough religious reasons for misogynistic, abusive behaviors today. So I think it's an important part of when we understand this, we can read it within context, but religion often has these, a side of religion can often have very, very negative, misogynistic views of and behaviors related to women that are abusive. One of the things to be aware of is Abraham, it gets richer and richer and richer through the rest of this story. Chapter 13, verse 2. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he journeyed on by stages from the Negev to as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to this place where he had made an altar for the Lord. So here's an interesting question about this whole thing. When does, in the story of Abraham and Sarah, when do they get their first piece of land? They've been promised Canaan. When do you think in the story do they get their first piece of land? It's at the very end of the story. It's Sarah's tomb.
Oh, yes.
The first time Abram gets any piece of land is he goes to the local king who he has helped support.
Okay.
And he says, I would like to have this land as a tomb for my wife, and I'd like the well next to it. Shepherds need wells. And so when they make that deal, the king says, I want to give you this land. And Abraham says, no, I don't want you to give me this land. I want title to the land. So I'm going to pay you for the land.
Right.
And the reason why this is important is then he has a deed for the place in which his wife is buried, and there was a well next to that piece of property. And this is a very important beginning stages, but it takes them, depending on how you do the math, over 30 years, 40 years for him to get possession of the first piece of land. God's covenant doesn't happen fast.
Isn't Abraham later buried next to Sarah?
That's part of the tradition.
Yeah.
But actually, there's lots of debate about this, is that in Hebron, there is a place for Rachel's burial, and somebody else, Leah's, I think.
Yeah.
And then further up north is where Sarah has been buried. And so, yeah, this is the tombs are significant because ancestors are significant. And that's part of that clanal kind of mentality and environment and stuff. just, you know, the thing that you might want to have some fun with is if you continue to read in these chapters, God makes an added covenant in chapter 15, where he again says, this is the stars of heaven, you're going to have this many descendants. But it's really important that you also get in mind a second situation of ethics and stuff is when Ishmael, when Hagar, Sarah's servant, Sarah is barren, and Hagar is her handmaid, and so she has relationships with. There's a whole weird situation with this, but that he has relationships with Hagar, with Sarah in the room, and if you've ever read The Handmaid's Tale, guess where that comes from? Another biblical reference. What I want us to understand is the relationship between Hagar and Sarah goes sour very quickly, to the point where Sarah eventually says, you kill her,
Go away.
kill her son, or there are consequences. She doesn't clarify what the consequences are, but this is another sign of an abusive relationship where someone who has done exactly what they have been told to do is then punished in this situation. And eventually it's God who has to rescue Hagar and Ishmael. It is not Abram, not Abraham. So just be aware, this pattern of behavior continues to well up in this Abraham-Sarah tradition. Many of us have read the Red Tent people.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it because it takes a woman's, not a feminist, but a woman's perspective on some of this story tradition. And I found it very fascinating. And it's written from a different, it's not written from a male perspective or a man's perspective. So, next week, there is a book that I'm going to send out and let people know. It's by Barbara Rossing, and it's about the book of Revelation. There's 11 chapters in the book. If you look, and I'm trying to think of the title. I just lost it. It's something like Revelation Revealed or something like that. It takes a very positive view. I looked online and you can get a copy of it for $2.50 or $6. So if you wanted to read a companion piece, and I'm going to be using that as part of the resource for looking at Revelation, one of the resources, just be aware of that. Let me see if I can call that one up.
Do you remember, Laura, or anybody else, the title? I've got the book too, but I can't remember the title.
I had it written down here, but I can't find it.
Yeah, let me see.
Is that Ross? R-O-S-I-N-G? Is that it, Rossing?
R-O-S-S-I-G.
Oh, two
She's
S's.
a biblical scholar at Chicago School of Theology.
Okay.
So
if we looked under her name, we'd probably find it.
Oh yeah.
Something about the rapture. Just a minute.
That the rapture exposed.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah, the rapture
Revelation's exposed.
A message of hope in the book of Revelation. She also confronts in the book. She also confronts some of the misunderstandings from a biblical standpoint. As a scholar, she addresses some of the misunderstandings we have about the rapture and the book of Revelation. And like I said, there are used copies. I found some. There's some at Powell's. There's some at other places where if you want to order it, you can. You don't need to. But I just found it for me personally, it was a really condensed way to look at Revelation, and I think it can be helpful.
Would someone repeat the title of the book again?
The Rapture Exposed. I don't know who dinged it. So, The Rapture Exposed.
Got it. There's also Thrifty Books online that has a lot of used books.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that out first.
Yeah, I just typed in the title and saw the prices from $2.50 up to $13. But a lot of them were about $6.
Okay. Thank you. Pastor, I'm really interested in Revelations. I took a class many years ago, and I was more confused coming out of the class than I was going in. So it's just like, blah. So this will be helpful.
Well, and I approach Revelation differently because it's an apocalyptic text, and apocalyptic texts are very different than history, and it's not predictive, though it has implications. So it doesn't predict the end of time. It explains how that end of time, how that we as people living in the midst of what I would call trauma, religious and persecutional trauma, how we stay in the picture and part of the game. The other thing that I always lift up is that I've counted 27 times when forgiveness, conversion and forgiveness are addressed in the book of Revelation. And at the end, everything gets saved. There's all sorts of people who die and all that kind of stuff. But then chapter 21 and 22, 20 and 21 basically say, and everything is, and it's all going to work out. So just be aware. Just be aware of that. So I'm heading off to the parking lot to do ashes. And
See you soon. Yep.
Okay.
Me too.
All righty.
It might take me longer.
Yeah, just a bit. Okay, everybody. God bless.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
righty. Amen.